Welcome into Courtside Seats with Kroeger, a Charlotte Hornets podcast. Here he is, Chris Kroeger.
Here we are. It's episode 34, another edition of Courtside Seats, our Charlotte Hornets podcast. I'm excited to talk to this guy because when I was doing my radio show, it was probably every 3 or 4 weeks I'm getting this guy on the horn because I wanted to talk NBA, and he just knows what he's doing. Love this guy from basketballinsiders.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Steve Kyler NBA. It is the great Steve Kyler. Steve, good to talk to you, man. How you been?
I am well, my friend. It's been a minute.
It has been, and now I'm on the other side. I'm not doing the talk show anymore. I'm doing the play-by-play stuff, and I got this podcast working, and so I thought, you know what, we're after the trade deadline. Life's probably a little bit more calm for Steve Kyler, so let's give him a call, right?
Yeah, especially this year, I think we ended up with 57 players. The math on it was like 1.5% of the NBA traded places at the trade deadline, so it was the busiest trade deadline we've seen in a really long time. I think it was the busiest since the trade deadline was a thing. So, good to be on the other side of it.
Well, it's funny because I talked to Bobby Marks. This is probably 3 weeks ago now at this point, and Bobby was saying, well, I think there are people interested in being buyers, but who's interested in selling? And I'm just not sure what the market is. And, maybe it's going to be a quiet trade deadline. And to your point, it was anything but that. It was probably the most active few weeks in NBA history. So what gives? Like, what flipped the script to where all of a sudden all chaos broke loose across the league?
Well, I don't think anybody really saw the LA Clippers deal that moved Tobias Harris to Philly coming. Yeah. I mean, there was a sense that, Tobias was offered a contract extension, said no, was going to look for a bigger number. All signs pointed to he wanted to stay in LA just on a bigger number, but you saw this with Blake Griffin. If you're not willing to do it the way they want to do it, they'll trade you away. And I think that was a big part of kind of the move. But you really saw kind of the haves in the NBA just kind of go all in. When you look at Toronto making the move for Marc Gasol, that's now you've got to make the next move and the next move. There weren't as many ending contract swapping type deals as I expected. I kind of expected maybe Terrence Ross in Orlando was going to go. You just start to that's what the trade deadline normally is. But the fact that what I would say there were meaningful moves at the trade deadline was what was most uncharacteristic, because normally the trade deadline's trading two guys at the end of your bench for two guys at the end of my bench, and they doesn't necessarily matter. There were a lot of meaningful trades this year. Yeah,
and to that point, I'll hop on that train of thought for a second with you when you talk about like Terrence Ross as an example. I know there were questions about us as an organization with Jeremy Lamb. He's in the final year of his contract, and Mitch Kupchak said on a conference call with the media that Jeremy is a really good player, and we need him as a team trying to make a playoff push and solidify playoff positioning. You don't want to lose guys like that because you certainly won't see a return on investment that's going to help you in the short term. And I'd say that's probably true for Orlando, right? They're at a point where they've done a lot of losing. They just want to make the playoffs, and Vucevic has had a great year, and Terrence Ross has been really good. You just don't want to punt on that, and so whatever you get in return for Terrence Ross probably isn't going to help you in the short term as you try to make a playoff push.
Correct, and when you're able to get a Markelle Fultz for a Jonathan Simmons instead of a Terrence Ross, that's an easier decision to make. And again, I think that there's, we're going to have a flatter lottery system. So, there's the chance that you could pop into a higher draft pick by virtue of being the 8th seed. You no longer have to be, the first or second worst team in the NBA to maybe get a good lottery pick. And I think there were a lot of teams that said, look, if you can't get Zion Williamson or R.J. Barrett or Cam Reddish or John Morant, you're better off trying to make the playoffs. And, I've talked to the Orlando front office quite a bit this year about what their goals are, and they just see that there's more value in getting your franchise into the postseason, letting your young guys learn from that experience, and maybe being able to get into free agency and say, we're one player away, being way more valuable than I got the 6th pick in a 4-player draft. So I think there was some of that, and I think certainly the teams that were close enough to kind of matter opted to stay in the hunt because, the middle or the bottom of kind of any season's the worst place to be. You don't want to be 13 That's always like no man's land in the NBA.
Yeah, it's crazy, too, when you talk about, okay, what destabilized the trade market in Philly, obviously. I mean, we had Tobias Harris in this building with 4 seconds left in the game, hit a game winner, and then 4 hours later he's on another team. And so I know we're thinking like, hey, you couldn't have done that deal 24 hours earlier. Why'd you have to wait until after we got done, but until you decided to punt on the year? But it's kind of crazy, too. New York, obviously. Anthony Davis, what that whole situation was, caught everybody, maybe I wouldn't say sideswipe, because I think there's always been rumors of whether he wants in or he wants out or any of that. But the Kristaps deal with Dallas, nobody saw that coming, right? That really just threw the league on top of its head, and everything else just seemed to chase after that.
Yeah, I think the suddenness of that. But, the truth of it is there has been kind of talk that, him and his brother's very involved. He's kind of his agent, kind of managing the business side for him, that they were never enamored with kind of how the Knicks organization runs. So some of this was like, it was telegraphed a little, but to hear he doesn't necessarily believe and he's gone 3 hours later, that was very sudden. And supposedly how that all started was basically Dallas reaching out for Tim Hardaway, saying, we'll take Tim Hardaway. And they go, well, we've got another idea. And then you end up with Kristaps Porzingis. There was never really any serious kind of shopping of that. I talked to some teams that are like, we didn't even know he was there, or they had moved so quickly. So some of it is, you decide, okay, this is the way to go, and you make that move. And I like decisiveness, because I think sometimes indecisiveness can kill you, because once it gets out, like I can only imagine what the day-to-day of the Lakers locker room and team chemistry is like when the entire roster had been offered to another team and then you couldn't get the deal done. That's the thing GMs dread, is that you kind of have to walk some of this stuff back and tell some of these guys after the trade deadline, no, we love you and you're part of what we're doing and we believe in you. Yeah, sure you do. I think you've seen the way they've played, or certainly the way they played before the trade deadline. Nobody was inspired to be a Laker that day.
Yeah, and then you look. So you mentioned Tobias Harris with Philly. So they're the first team, like in the top 4 of the East, to really make a big move. And then Milwaukee makes the move as well, as they bring in Nikola Mirotic. Toronto gets in the mix as well on Marc Gasol. But it was interesting because that was a major piece, right? I think everybody has said across the league, maybe outside of Golden State, Philly might have the best starting 5 in the NBA. It's hard to disagree with that. But then the number 1 seed in the East for off and on over the last couple of months, Milwaukee felt like they needed to make a little bit of a deal to solidify their team and their bench, which they did. It was a nice move. And then Toronto obviously lands Marc Gasol, which is a great piece for them as well. But it's interesting, as you said, the power teams kind of separating themselves, saying, no, we're all in. And once Philly made a move, it put pressure on Milwaukee. And then Toronto was standing pat late at the deadline, and they made a move. So it was interesting to watch everybody kind of keep their eyes on everybody else and finally go all in the game of poker they were playing.
Yeah, and I think some of it also talks about process, right? Is, most GMs, and you start working the draft, you start working the trade deadline 2-3 months ahead of it, and you're jotting things down and you're putting them on your board in your war room, and you get to kind of deadline day and you go, okay, here's the things we can do. And then you start calling teams and you realize, okay, maybe that one we can't do. Okay, now we move to plan B. Okay, plan B's off the board. Now we go to plan, and you don't want to be the one that says, well, gee, I wanted to do something and you couldn't do anything. But there is kind of an almost, okay, and again, Marc Gasol, everybody in the league thought he was going to Charlotte, and then Toronto said, we'll do it. So, it's kind of interesting to watch just how the decision-making goes. And then a lot of times the stuff we're hearing about for weeks and weeks that you think is going to happen, Terrence Ross, I would probably put a large sum of money if Terrence Ross was going to be traded, and he didn't. He even thought he was going to be traded. So sometimes it's just interesting to watch how process works out, because a lot of times it's not a lack of interest or willingness. A lot of teams are willing to do things, but being able to find something that makes sense, not only in the short term, but the medium term. And that's why I like some of these moves. What Milwaukee did, I think, is smart. It doesn't impact them negatively in the future. The same with Marc Gasol in Toronto. If Kawhi Leonard walks away, Marc Gasol likely opts out. No long-term risk there. You just start to walk through it, and some of them were just really smart moves.
Well, and on that note, the one team on the outside of that group where they didn't do any deals was Boston, which is interesting because Danny Ainge has always been known as a guy to mix it up. And we can think about whatever about Anthony Davis and the summer and all that stuff, but they kind of zigged when everybody else zagged. So what will we think about Boston? Because obviously they've had some unrest in their locker room in terms of some of the comments that have been made about how they don't feel like they're living up to expectations. So I don't know. Let's fast forward a month and a half from now. Did Boston do the right thing by not shaking up their roster at the deadline?
Well, I think the Terry Rozier component of that will be interesting because he's going to be a coveted free agent. What I was told is the value return wasn't really there for Boston. And, you're talking about Kyrie Irving as your starting point guard. And Kyrie's had a lot of injury and durability issues and having depth, especially now that the East is loaded up, if you will. I think the value that Terry brings as a player was greater than anything that were being offered. But, this has kind of been Boston, too, is like every time you go, okay, Danny's going to dig into the cookie jar, maybe trade one of those young guys or trade a draft pick, he opts not to. If you think about it, he ultimately said the price on Jimmy Butler was too high, price on Kawhi Leonard was too high, so there's an overvaluation of players in Boston. That's been kind of Danny's MO for a while. But look, I still think they're a really good team. If you look at it, they're as deep as anybody. When it comes down to slowing down and you're facing a team every other day and you don't have to travel and it's not the 82-game grind, Boston's got a lot of things that could separate themselves that maybe don't look as good in the regular season, but are way better in the postseason. And the funny thing about Boston, I think most people forget, is at the trade deadline, they had won 11 of 12. I mean, they were playing really good basketball.
Yep.
So, I can understand standing pat when you feel like maybe your guys have turned a corner.
And it's also the pressure of the NBA, right? When they're just living on a different plane in terms of expectations. And so one loss for them or two losses for them feels like it's 10, right? Because they're just living in a different world where it is all about championships. That's the ultimate barometer in Boston. I think Marcus Morris said it in an interview the other day about how, you go back to the big three in Boston and how they're revered now in that city and in its sports history. They won one championship, and he was saying that's how hard this thing is. That team, look how good they were. Look how much people love them. They won one championship. It's so hard to do what they're trying to do. So I think that speaks to that. You're right. The sky is not falling in Boston, but they certainly haven't lived up to maybe what the expectations are.
Yeah, when you think about it, I think on the season right now they've won 60-something% of their games, 62-ish% of their games. In any other year, that's amazing.
That's great.
But then you're dealing with a Milwaukee team that is so far ahead of anybody's expectations. The Pacers keep winning games without Victor Oladipo. Philly's very good. Toronto's really good. Brooklyn's chipping away every time they see somebody. They're stealing a win here and there. The East is the middle for a big chunk of the league. When you get outside of Milwaukee and Toronto, the middle of the NBA lives in the Eastern Conference, and a lot of times they're eating each other alive on a week-to-week basis. But, grand scheme of things, if Boston ends the season with 62% of their wins, they've done a pretty good job.
All right, Steve, let's change gears for a second. I actually want to talk about you on the podcast. So how long have you been covering the NBA? How many years is this for you now?
Oh, you're going to out me. This will be my 21st season.
Okay.
So my first season kind of doing it part-time was Penny Hardaway's last season in Orlando. I'm in Central Florida, so I cover most of my games out of Orlando. My first full season was the season after that, so just around the lockout. So 98, 99 when I started doing this, so it's been a minute.
How much has the league changed? What's something you could point to and say this is a specific example? Obviously, it's grown. Now it's 52 weeks a year, 352 weeks out of the year, 365 days a year. But what's something you'd say, like specifically, hey, this I can't even believe how big this is part of the NBA now when 21 years ago we didn't even pay attention to this?
Well, I think that's true. We can say this is true of almost anything, is social media and the way social media has impacted not only how we get news and information, but just the frequency and, like you said, 24/7 at any given moment. There's something on Twitter about the NBA, and that's very different. But I think the biggest thing I see is, one is the size of organizations are much, much bigger. Mm-hmm. When I came into the league, you probably had a front office of 3, maybe 4 guys. Now there are 30 guys in a front office, analytics and and advanced analytics that have really changed the game, and it's because we've got all this amazing technology. The XY cameras that are installed looking down, and second spectrum, and the ability to really minutely manage the game digitally, especially from a coaching and a positioning and just data point of view. Those are the two things for me, is just the number of people that are involved now and just how much more we know, one from social media and two from analytics, about the game, that it's not just the eye test. And I know fans love to say, well, I watched the game and I see this, that, and the other, but sometimes your eyes can deceive you, that just because you're scoring 20 points doesn't mean it's 20 good points.
And I guess to that end, this is a broad philosophical question, but I'd ask you, do you think the components you need as an organization, both on the micro level and the macro level, to be a championship caliber team, do you think they're any different today than they were 20 years ago?
I think it's harder. And what I would say to that is, it's easy to say this in hindsight, right? Of course you saw it that way. But I look at kind of the teams that have really been dominant all the way to the finals, like the year Oklahoma City went to the finals against Miami. There was a special it factor about that team that you could almost feel. When Golden State got there the first time, same thing, San Antonio, there have just been these teams that you're around them in the locker room and you're like, there's something really different here. And on the same side is, like Houston, as good as Houston was last year, there was something odd about Houston, and it surfaced in the postseason. They couldn't get it done. So, I think that more so than ever before, organizationally, you have to be completely aligned from the front office to the ball boy and everything in between. When teams have individual agendas or players or coaches and things like that, that's when really good teams that look great on paper don't execute. And I think I see that more and more, that organizationally you have to be in lockstep in order to be, say, as good as Milwaukee, because the big difference in Milwaukee was everyone this year is lockstep with what Mike Budenholzer is doing. That was not the case even a year ago.
Yeah, and you know what? I'll take it a step further. I'd say, like with your players on the court, right, and in your locker room, being connected as a team, I think matters even more now than it ever has before, right? Because of all the things that pull you in different directions, and like you said, social media and the digital media age we live in, and the way this league is consumed and talked about all the time, it's so easy for a team to be frayed apart at the seams just in the blink of an eye. And I think now more than ever, to see how a team is connected and how they pull for each other and root for each other. And I'm not saying every team needs to be singing Kumbaya in the locker room, but there needs to be some sort of cultural identity that exists. So it could be different from every team to another, but I think when you talk about the scouting standpoint, to your point, we could look at data and talent and all these raw numbers all you want, but I still think that X factor of the player makeup and your roster makeup, I think that might be more valuable now than it's ever been before in the NBA.
Yeah, and there's a whole brand of new science that's coming into all of this that's really looking at, trying to equate behavior and psychology aspects to statistical performance. Draft Express has this great product that they've put out that's basically an IQ based, and it's basically tying and creating a database around standard psychology testing and how it relates to kind of performance. And there's just this whole new level of, are we going to be able to kind of look at players and understand them a little better? Because, you look around the league, who would have thought Markelle Fultz, who was as good as he was in high school and as incredible as he was at Washington, would just implode on his own weight the way he did? And there's just no way you can know that. And when you look at how bad missing in the draft can handicap a franchise for not only a season, but for, half a decade. If you miss on the draft, you're going to be bad for a while. So I think that's a big factor too. And it would be remiss not to point out that the money has changed so dramatically. When we're talking about players consigned for $250 million, that changes everybody's motivation. So, it's an even harder puzzle to solve because of that. When players go in the locker room, put their head in their phone, and never talk to their teammates, that's a thing. That's an ever-increasing thing. You're hearing more teams are creating no-phone zones when they go to team meals and, trying to get players to have real connections with each other. So there's a whole new era of issues that teams are trying to solve that aren't just about can you put the ball in the bucket.
Well, what's the famous Pat Riley line? The disease of me, right? That's a thing probably more now than it's ever been before.
Because everybody can be their own brand and their own superstar. You know, you hear this a lot. You know, I cover the draft pretty extensively, and you'll sit and talk with some of these young guys before they've ever been drafted, and they're worried about their brand and how they're going to position and the things they're going to do off the court. And it's like, wow, you know, if that's your motivation, you're probably not going to be very successful on the court. Let the first part handle the second part. But it's just a very different world that way, and everybody's a social media star. You know, you look at brands like sneaker companies and things like that that are just trying to align with these kids as early as possible because they're social media superstars. You look at Zion Williamson, he was a superstar in a fan perspective before he ever picked up a basketball for Duke, and it's just going to get worse when he's the number one pick. You know, so you've got to make sure these kids are wired the right way. So I don't envy the job of NBA GMs and managing all of that, because I think from the outside, it's the easiest thing to forget is that is a huge factor in production and performance.
Well, and it's also, I know nobody wants to give the Warriors any more credit than they deserve, but I've always thought this about Golden State. It's the most underrated thing, and it still blows my mind that it just doesn't get talked about enough. But the way they've come together as a team over the years, and they pull for each other, they play an unselfish style of basketball, and everybody I think always says, well, everybody has fun when you're winning and you're scoring, but you know what? They could let all those things seep into their team, and maybe in short stretches they have, but on the whole, to be doing this for now, 5 years, where they're just playing this brand of basketball where everybody touches the ball and everybody shares it, and they buy into this and they root for each other on the whole for the most part. That's not normal. That's a unique thing. It's what makes them dynastic. You could talk about all the talent you want in the world, but for them to play that unselfish level of basketball and to do it consistently for this period of time, it's what makes them special. And I don't hear that talked about enough when we heap praise on Golden State.
Absolutely. And the one thing I say about Golden State that was different from, say, Cleveland last year or some of the other teams that we're seeing, you know, Golden State was grown together, not thrown together.
True.
You know, they went through, especially Klay Thompson and Steph Curry, went through some ugly losing before they had success. You know, they started to turn the corner with Mark Jackson. You know, Steph had all of those injuries that got him on that value contract. Then they get Draymond Green and the gift in the draft, and then Draymond was better than anybody thought he'd be, and then they all started to get positively reinforced for being unselfish. You know, everybody got a shoe deal, everybody got named an all-star, everybody got an max contract. You know, it wasn't kind of we have to compete over each other to get what we want. We can all get what we want if we play well together. And then when you got a big three that says, look, we're all getting paid, just come in and do what we do, everybody's landed there and said that's the right way to play. And I think it's because everyone there has been rewarded financially, and everyone's been rewarded really well off the court in terms of their exposure and their ability to monetize themselves away, and they've been able to do it while being part of a really good team. That's really unusual, because normally it's the top 2-3 guys get the shine and the next two guys feel a little disrespected, and that's why they walk away when their contract's up. You know, the fact that Golden State's made it really clear they're going to pay Klay Thompson whatever it takes. They'll pay Draymond Green whatever it takes. It helps them moving into that brand new building that's going to have a lot more revenue. But when you're putting it out there that we'll pay tax to keep this thing together, it really reinforces just be unselfish and win.
Steve, last thing on like some big picture NBA stuff, and then we'll switch gears. We'll talk Hornets before we let you go. I think it was Ryan Russillo, and I'm paraphrasing here, but Ryan tweeted out something the other day, and I think this was on the heels of, you know, the Anthony Davis drama and everything that's going on there. And he tweeted out something to the effect of, when did it become such a burden to play in the NBA? And maybe that's too black and white and too cut and dry, but I you know, and I'm young, I'm 32, I'm one of these crazy millennials that everybody says is ruining the earth, but I'm amazed at the state of I'm not going to paint a broad brush across the league because I don't think it's true either, but I am amazed though at, you know, like, let's use Anthony as an example, and I'm not even saying he's right or wrong in whatever's going on there, But he signed a 4-year contract, and to me, this is the trade-off, right? In the NBA, fully guaranteed contracts. You get the 4th or 5th-year option, and if you play for a 4-year or 5-year deal, the trade-off in my mind is, any number of things could happen. I could face catastrophic injury. This team could fall apart. We're not going to win as many games as I thought we would. I might lose my coach, my GM, whatever. I'm still getting my money. That's the safety net that exists in a long-term contract. On the other hand, and this is where I credit LeBron just a million times over the years, he's done these 1-in-1 deals or these 2-in-1 deals, and he's maintained his flexibility and his leverage to go wherever he wants in exchange for leaving money on the table and longer-term financial security. But that's the trade-off to him. He'd rather control his future and lose a little money in the long term to do it. But I guess where's that trade-off exist in the NBA right now? Because I do feel like a lot of fans, and I'm speaking for fans here, you can't have it both ways. You don't get to sign the 4 to 5 year contract and then halfway through say, oh yeah, I want my money, and oh yeah, I don't want to do it here anymore. Because to me, that's the trade-off when you sign a long-term deal. And I think there are a lot of fans in the NBA right now that are saying, hey, this isn't the NBA I grew up on. You owe something to your team. You signed a contract. That's a two-way street.
Yeah, but the reality is it's not, and it's I want my cake and eat it too generation, and unfortunately owners and team GMs are empowering these guys because they will cave to it. Because one, you don't want to burn the bridge with the agency, you don't want to burn the bridge with your existing roster. Everybody is a 20-loss, stretch of games away from being fired. The risks are so high that. Like everybody was, I talked to a bunch of GMs, good for Dell Demps not trading, Anthony Davis, but, probably puts Dell Demps on the hot seat because he couldn't do it. So you maybe have won the pride battle or the moral victory, but at the end of the day, it still may cost you your job because you couldn't keep Anthony Davis happy. So there's a want my cake and eat it too, and I think the fact that most players have been able to do it is why more players and, more importantly, agents feel empowered to do it. And I've said this before, specific to the draft. I've never understood why there wasn't a policy that said if you don't compete in the combine, you are not draft eligible. And the reason is because there's some team out there that'll take the promising player even if he doesn't go, and if all 30 teams won't follow the same kind of structure, then we're going to talk about collusion, and then we're going to talk about things that nobody wants to talk about. But, at some point, there's got to be a change in that process because, like you said, I don't think fans understand it, and I think players forget sometimes that fans and, to a big extent, the media are the lifeblood of this industry. If you didn't have the fans and the exposure that comes from the media, nobody would know who you are. More importantly, you wouldn't get paid what you get paid.
Yeah, it's just tough because I think, to me, and this is why this is why I love Kemba, right? I just love him to his core because he is a player that understands the journey, which is, it is a journey. It's not always easy. It's not your God-given right to step into this league and get an NBA championship or become an all-star. It requires work. And you know what? Sometimes the pain and the disappointment, while you're not saying, oh, yeah, that's what I want, when it comes and then you come out on the other side better for it, that's what makes it that much more special. And I guess not everybody can win a championship. There are 30 teams. Only one guy gets to hold the Larry O'Brien trophy at the end of the season. I guess, I don't know, it just seems like so many people have this false expectation that, well, I want to win a championship or I want to compete for a championship. But the journey, to me, has always been, that's part of the fun of it. It's the thrill. And yeah, there's going to be some disappointment along the way. But, man, if you told Charles Barkley he could win one NBA championship, he'd give his left arm, I'm sure, to make it happen. And he tried. It just didn't work out. But it doesn't completely, not validate his career. So, I don't know. I'm on my soapbox a little bit. But I guess...
No, but you're rightly so. I mean, there's a couple of things. As one, generationally, things have changed. And I think some of it is kind of the AAU culture, is the fact that, when you become a promising player, you latch onto a team that never loses a game. Everything you want is handed to you. You go on this whirlwind ride. Then you get, offered a college scholarship, and they make it super easy. And you get all this adulation. And then the next day, you're a top 5 pick in the NBA, and somebody shoves $8 million into your pocket the day one, and then everybody coddles you because you're the future of the franchise. And then when things don't go right, a lot of these guys aren't wired for it. They don't know how to deal with it. And I think when you see guys that have had some personal struggles, Kemba Walker, there was a while there where he wasn't thought of as an elite level guy, even as a college basketball player, or let alone an NBA player. I think it's why you see those guys shine the way they shine and do it with such grace, because they've had to go through adversity in their life. I've said for a while, that's why I love the G League. I think every first-round draft pick should have to spend a week in the G League, just so they will appreciate what it means to be an NBA player.
Yeah, going on buses and commercial flights and staying in at Holiday Inn Expresses is not the lavish life of the normal NBA player. But that's the G League, and I don't think guys realize what a grind that is.
And if you see anybody who's come from the G League, boy, are they appreciative of where they're at now. So, some of it I think is that. But, I mean, the bigger thing is until teams say this is what you've got to do and maybe it gets addressed in the next collective bargaining agreement, I don't think it's going to go anywhere. Maybe it does because it blew up in Anthony Davis's face in such a negative way that maybe you do lessons learned there, but I have a sneaking suspicion it won't be the last player we see do it.
All right, we're off our soapbox, so we wrap with a little Hornets here, Steve. So I wonder what you think of what James Borrego has done with the Hornets thus far, because at this point last year, the Hornets were sitting 10 games under 500, and while their playoff hopes were still alive because the East wasn't that strong last year either, this team this year is a little bit further ahead of schedule, just 2 games under 500. They're sitting in 7th in the East right now. Kemba's playing the most incredible basketball of his career. Jeremy Lamb continues to play really well, and Tony Parker, probably in terms of value, one of the best free agent pickups this season in the NBA. So what do you make of the Hornets so far?
All of those things and a little bit more. I think the one thing, and I had JB in Orlando as an interim coach, so I spent a lot of time not only around JB, but around players that were coming off the Jock Vaughn, and just the way JB's energy, his enthusiasm, he doesn't overcomplicate things. Younger players really appreciate the way he teaches, and I think it's no surprise that we've seen, guys like Malik Monk and to a certain extent Miles Bridges and, Willie Hernan Gomez, really kind of respond well to JB. And when you talk about needing to kind of grow some of these kids up to become a bigger part of what you're doing, I think JB was an incredible hire. And then recognizing all of the things Kemba could do for you on the floor, not just in his offense, but the way he can play defense and the way he can dictate tone and pace and play up-tempo. I think all of those are why JB was the right hire. I love the hire when they did it. I love the hire today. I think in the long term, he's as good a hire as you could have expected if you weren't going to go into one of the, reach-ready, really expensive type guys. But I think the big thing for Charlotte is, maybe you're going to be good enough to get into the dance. I think they get in as probably the 6-7 seed. I think they'll be there. That probably means you're going to get trucked by, a Milwaukee team or a Boston team or one of them. But you've got to get another star next to Kemba, and I think it's a beautiful thing that Kemba wants to stay in Charlotte. I think it's a great thing that Michael Jordan and the front office continue to say they want Kemba to stay in Charlotte. Those are good things, but I think that in order for Charlotte to turn the corner, one of the young guys really has to pop and become a real meaningful player, or they've got to find one in the draft or in trade.
Yeah, and to that point, we don't have to get into specifics on this, but obviously the reports about what we might have done or what we were willing to do at the trade deadline, I thought Mitch Kupchak hit the nail on the head, and I'm paraphrasing, but when he said later that afternoon after the trade deadline, he said, we weren't willing to forfeit our future to make something happen. And so that I think that can mean a lot of things, right? That can mean young players, that can mean draft picks, it can mean both of those things. And so he did say, look, I'm disappointed. I would have liked to have made a trade. It didn't happen. But I think I remember talking to you, Steve, when Mitch was brought in, and we talked a lot about what he's going to bring to the franchise and the front office, and I think stability and vision and organization were all the things we talked about. And I think even on a decision like that, that's the value of Mitch Kupchak to our organization, to say, hey, guys, I know maybe we want to add a little bit of something to continue the playoff push, but in the long run, we need to keep our draft picks and our young players and continue to develop from within, because that's going to pay dividends a year or two from now. And maybe that's something you don't think about in the here and now, but trust me, a year or two from now, you're going to be glad maybe you didn't make a trade at the trade deadline 2 years ago.
Yeah, there's a fun thing I do as part of my my mock drafts is, I'll chart underneath the table where all the picks came from and who the players were that were involved. So when you look at some of them, you go, oh, we're giving up the number 3 pick for player that didn't matter 5 years ago, that's when it really comes home to roost a little bit, is that you did mortgage your future. And I think it's smart. If you're not going to get the complementary long-term piece to Kemba Walker, don't mortgage your future, because you never know where the ping pong balls are going to bounce. And you could end up with, the number 3, number 4 pick in a really good draft, either this year or next year, because that's what it was going to take to, say, get a Marc Gasol or get some of the others. And, look, there's another market that's open now, and that's the buyout market. And I know there are a couple of players. I've had an agent reach out to me saying, what do you think about my client in Charlotte? So we'll see. Charlotte may have its choice of a few guys that could add and help. Maybe they're not going to be, a 7-foot former all-star, but maybe there'll be a good player that can help in some of those same areas.
Yeah, and then when you look at what Kemba's done, Steve, this is now the 4th consecutive year we sit here and say, man, Kemba's had the best season of his career. But no, seriously, this time Kemba's had the best season of his career, and he's an all-star starter this weekend in Charlotte for All-Star Weekend. But I was trying to do the math with somebody the other day. If you talk about all NBA, if you're voting today, and we won't, obviously there's still a lot of basketball left, but the locks in the backcourt are what for all NBA? James Harden, Russell Westbrook, Steph Curry, I'd say Kyrie Irving as well, right? And then you get into that mix of who's that 5th and 6th slot, and I'd say Kemba right now is in that mix, right? Kemba, if the season ended today, would probably be on that third team All-NBA ballot. I think that's entirely realistic right now.
Yep, and I think the other thing, too, is keep in mind he's still just 28 years old.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot more. This is where we call the prime of the player's career. So if you talk about a 4-year deal or 5-year deal for Kemba, you may not like that last year, but you're probably going to get 3-4 more years of really high-level production out of Kemba. It's. I still think there's more to go, because I think you've seen his shooting percentages are getting better. Mm-hmm. His shot selection is getting better. His awareness of where to get his shots are getting better. He's starting to get a lot more James Harden in his game in terms of, I'm going to cross you over and I'm going to go. And it's been fun. Again, get a second guy next to Kemba. Watch out.
What do you think of Miles so far?
I love Miles Bridges. I do. I think he's got a lot to offer. I think he's going to grow as a player. He's been a little older than, say, your typical rookie, but I think in time he's going to be a really good complementary piece. I never get nuts over what anybody does in their rookie year, and I'll say look no further than Malik Monk for proof of that, it does take some time for these guys to adjust and learn, especially when you've been in college. I was looking at Lonzo Ball last year and his shooting struggles, and I went back and charted all of his threes at UCLA, and he was just getting the ball in different places, and that's just going to change your rhythm and how your release is. And you look at his shots this year, he worked on getting shots in practice that he would get in games, and his percentages are up. And I think you're going to see, that's true of Malik. I think Malik is playing way better, and I think you'll see that in Miles as well once he understands where his offense will come from in the NBA, and then train to that. And, that's kind of a big thing. That's usually why you see sophomore players take such a big jump, even experienced players like Miles.
All right, Steve, well, maybe we'll talk to you again before the playoffs start, but until then, I'll ask you, give me your NBA Finals teams. You don't have to tell me who you think wins, but who comes out of the East, because I think everybody still thinks it's Golden State. Maybe you think otherwise, but who do you think winds up in the finals?
Yeah, I'm not going to bet against Golden State Warriors, especially not the way DeMarcus Cousins has been playing. And, once the game slows down in the postseason and they get a lot more time, they're going to pick teams apart. So I've got the Warriors in the West. And in the East, until somebody proves to me that they can beat the Milwaukee Bucks in 2 consecutive games, I'm going with Giannis and the Milwaukee Bucks. Mike Budenholzer has done an amazing job with that team, and the volume of threes that team puts up is really impressive, because you wouldn't think of the Milwaukee Bucks as a big three-point shooting team. They've got the whole package.
Yeah, the Hornets played them tooth and nail through 3 games so far this year. We took 1 game, lost the other 2, but they're just a bear. And when they go, and now this is probably the addition of Mirotic that really completely changes the landscape. And they blitzed the Hornets in the 4th quarter in Milwaukee a couple weeks ago. But when they go small with Giannis at the 5, forget about it. I just don't. There are very few teams that can hang with that.
I was going to say that. Wait till you see Giannis at the center position.
Oh,
it's going to be silly. It'll be a lot like you're seeing with Joel Embiid, because Joel likes to play right out top on the three-point line and just create off his quickness and create around the basket. There are going to be so many mismatch problems with Milwaukee, especially when they really figure out how to put Nico in that lineup and really get him rolling fourth quarter Nico has been pretty good the last year or so.
Steve, it is a pleasure to catch up with you. BasketballInsiders.com. He's on Twitter at Steve Kyler NBA if you're not following him already. And I'll see you in a few days here in Charlotte, okay? Thanks for dropping by.
Anytime, my friend. Be well.
That's episode 34 of Courtside Seats, our Charlotte Hornets podcast. Steve Kyler of BasketballInsiders.com dropping by. Good to talk to him. He's been covering the league, as you heard, for 2 decades and always plugged in, talking to people around the NBA. So some good thoughts on the NBA trade deadline post-mortem. If you've missed any of our previous episodes, you can check it out online at Hornets.com, on the Hornets mobile app, or visit our YouTube channel. Just search Charlotte Hornets. All of our great content's up there, and you can check out past episodes and a whole lot of other great content as well. You can find us wherever podcasts are available. That's Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and, of course, Apple Podcasts. Just search my name, Kroeger, or Charlotte Hornets, or Courtside Seats, and make sure you subscribe, rate, and review, and you can check out any of the episodes you've missed before. It's all there, too. We'll be back again next week, another edition of Courtside Seats.